So nice to see everyone. Thank you so much for being here. So, as I was saying, we are here for the Practice Forum, Trends in Counseling and Psychotherapy. This is a new initiative by Yorkville. This is our second one, and so far it's been so great to see the buy-in from students and just people from alumni and just everyone. So it's so great to see you here today. And that topic for today is high performance and looking in the mental health capacity. So welcome. This is our QR code. Feel free to sign on, scan it, and it'll give you our questions that are coming up in just a moment. So I'm the host for today. Thank you very much for being here. My name is Dr. Cindy Sage, and I am a faculty member at Yorkville University. I'm recognizing some names on here as being students, so it's excellent to see you. And I am also a counselor, so I'm here to learn from our experts. So maybe while we are getting our Mentimeter kind of addressed, I would love to hear you a little bit to see how you're feeling today. Are you guys excited for this? Are we here to learn? Are we feeling energetic? I know sometimes on a Thursday, a lot of the time we are struggling to find the energy, but yes, thank you. I'm seeing some great energy here. I'd also love to hear a little bit on what brings you here. Are you here to learn about counseling with mental health athletes or elites, or kind of what draws you for today? And there's definitely the option in our question and answers to have some of those open. And with that being said, we are struggling a little bit with our Mentimeter. So what we will do, we will get to that very shortly once we get that figured out. But I would love to open up and introduce you to our guest. But definitely before we do that, let's please stop for a moment and have our land acknowledgement. So we do have a fantastic faculty at Yorkville who's going to open up with our land acknowledgement. I'd like to welcome you, Michelle.
Thank you so much. Nice to see everyone here today, and I'm so pleased to be able to join you today. My name is Michelle Grimes. I'm the Vice President, Academic and Campus Principal for Yorkville University at our New Brunswick campus. And I'm pleased to provide the land acknowledgement today. So at Yorkville University and Toronto Film School, we know that our campuses, both physical and online, exist on and draw resources from the traditional lands of diverse Indigenous peoples and nations. And in New Brunswick, this includes the lands of the Wabanaki Confederacy, the Mi'kmaq, the Wolastoqiyik, Maliseet peoples under the Peace and Friendship Treaties of 1760 and 1761. In Toronto, our campuses sit on the treaty lands of the Toronto Purchase, home to the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And in British Columbia, our campus is on the unceded territories of the Kakite, the Musqueam, and the Coast Salish peoples. And we share this acknowledgement as a reminder of our ongoing commitment to strengthening our relationships with local Indigenous communities and deepening our understanding of the peoples whose lands we live and work on. And as a university, we have a responsibility to recognize the lasting impacts of colonization and to keep learning about how we can be part of meaningful change. And acknowledging the land isn't just a formality. It's a way to pause and reflect and honor the communities who have cared for these lands for generations. By continuing to engage in truth and reconciliation, we take small but important steps toward a more just and respectful future for everyone in Canada. Thank you, and back over to you, Cindy.
Thank you very much, Michelle. So we did have a chance to look at some of the questions that were coming up. And if you are just joining us and if the QR code did not work for you, please join us at menti.com. So www.menti.com. And you could use the code 425575551 as the code to participate. And there was another question if today is being recorded. Yes, today is being recorded. So if you have to leave early or if something does come up for you today, you can kind of always look back on today's chat. So today's agenda, we are going to start with a warm-up, getting to know each other. So you've had some time, hopefully, to add your take into the Menti. I also see some great feedback down in the chat, which we'll get to. I see some people being very excited to be here after 9 years and other people just wanting to know about this topic. So I'm so excited to see all that like enthusiasm and excitement. I share in that. So yes, we are joining in a great moment together. We do have our keynote speaker as Dr. Danelle Kabush, which I'll definitely introduce in a couple of moments. Great expert in this field as well as many others. We're going to have a 30-minute presentation from Dr. Danelle, and then we'll have a fireside chat, which is a lot of fun to watch and listen to. I get to be a fly in the wall just like you. We're going to have Dr. Kabush with Janelle Peters, who I'll also introduce in a couple moments. They're going to be doing a chat back and forth, and then an exciting opportunity for the audience to engage with a question and answer. So keep those questions coming up. We will definitely get to them soon. Then at the end, we'll have oh my goodness, a faculty panel discussion, which will then have our instructors from Yorkville talking on this topic, and we'll kind of get a bit of a different perspective than we might have from our two previous speakers. And then we'll have a wrap up. So thank you very much for being here, and let's get started. The topics for discussion today are going to be high performance contexts in counseling practice. And what that means, high performance contexts, it might be different than you think. We often think of athletes or there might be more to that. So stick around if you're curious what that is. We're going to also look at high performance in different practices. We're going to talk to Dr. Kabush about her journey throughout this journey. We're going to talk about high performance clients. We're talking about the risk and ethics and scope of this practice, and then counseling in high performance settings. We'll also talk about the professional pathways and resources to get there. So as I was mentioning earlier, this is the funnest part of today's engagement with the audience. So the question is, why are you joining us today and where are you joining us from? So we'll start with that. So where are you from? Edmonton, Vancouver, Ontario, Markham. We're kind of all over the place so far. Look at that, Florida. We're seeing so many yeah, look at all these places. So this is amazing. This is, as we saw the first time, not just Canada, we're expanding international. So this is so great to see that this is such a great topic for everyone. And that, yeah, whether you're tuning in from one side of Canada or the other, there's more of you here than you realize. So that's great to see from Yorkville. And the next question, and we kind of started with this, but how are you feeling today? This is a great counseling question. So if you're in this field, this should feel very familiar to you. And I'm seeing a lot of tired, curious, hopeful. I think everyone can kind of relate us checking in on a Thursday. I'm seeing excited. I'm seeing curious again. A lot of kind of these great questions. Hopeful. Definitely looking forward to seeing what hopeful is about. But yeah, so tons of great feelings. I mean, often know the check-in is a really great point to grounding ourselves as we begin our learning journey today. So thank you for checking in. What is your connection to Yorkville University? And so this is a great question that will, throughout our day today, we'll talk to people who are graduates from Yorkville as well as faculty in Yorkville. So it's nice to see we have some current students, we have alumni, and we have a couple others. So wonderful. So nice to see you all, and thank you for being here. And I should note, these are not numbers of people, it's percentage. So I was like, wait a minute, we have over 1,000 registrations. Why is there only 75? But that's what's happening. So yeah, it's a huge percentage of actual students, which is so great because you're getting on the ground learning that's going to really help you when you graduate. This is kind of something that if you're interested in this field, these are great people to get to know. So as I was mentioning, we have such a fantastic powerhouse of a keynote speaker today. So we have Dr. Danelle Kabush, which as you see, 20 years experience as an educator. So some of you might have had classes with Dr. Danelle, or some of you might be in classes with Dr. Danelle at Yorkville University. She's also a clinician, she's a consultant, as well as an expert in sports psychology and mental health. So with no further ado, I'm going to pass off this highlight and voice to now Danelle. Thank you for being here, and I look forward to learning with you.
Thanks for the introduction, Cindy, and everyone. Oh, wait, can everyone hear me? Okay, I'll start again. Thanks for the introduction, Cindy. I'm really excited to be here. So I'll go ahead and share my slides.
Sorry, let's do the questions first and then.
Oh, sorry. I'm ahead of myself here.
Yeah. Okay.
I have a question here. When you hear the term sports psychology, what is the first word or emotion that comes to mind? Okay, competition, pressure. We'll be talking about that. Performance, focus. Yeah. Athletes optimization. Great. Motivation. All my areas of passion are showing up on that slide, so that's great. How would you describe your relationship with sport coming into this webinar or practice forum today? Are you a current former athlete, an armchair fanatic, or do you avoid anything with a scoreboard? Okay, we've got some athletes, former athletes, competitors. Great, so you'll be able to relate to a lot of things today. Super. And we've just finished the Winter Olympic Games in Milano Cortino. So if you tuned in or watched or didn't, what was your favorite Winter Olympic sport? Hockey, very Canadian. Skating and figure skating. Skiing, ice dance. Great. All the skating ones are coming up strong here. That's great. I think we have most of them covered. Good range of interests.
Okay, I will stop sharing. So over to you, then.
I'll restart with saying I'm really excited to be here. I hope you're coming in when we're talking about athlete perspective and performance, you're coming in hydrated, well fed, rested, and ready to focus and engage with us here today. We've already mentioned some of the topics that I'll be going over, but I'll just highlight them again here. Just looking at understanding what high performance context and culture is, I'll be talking mainly from an athletic lens in my background in sports psychology. But as you'll see today, this can apply to many other domains in life, and I think you'll be able to relate to some of the ideas around a performance-based identity. I've also got a picture here of air traffic controllers. As I was doing my master's studies, my supervisor at the time, Dr. Terry Orlick, did a really interesting study with even air traffic controllers in a high stakes performance environment where they have to get planes in and out of the air safely, and how they took care of themselves to refocus, take intentional breaks, and show up as best they could in that environment. So lots of environments to apply this to. I'll talk about some of the impacts of high performance culture on athlete mental health and some of the concerns and factors that we need to be aware of if you're interested in working with high performance and athletes. Some of the considerations that come into the room when you're counseling athletes, and some of the main issues that they could be struggling with or dealing with, as well as some of the strengths they also bring. And I'll touch on some career pathways for counselors and psychotherapists and or psychologists. I've had a lot of questions over the years from masters of counselors, masters of counseling students, and saying, how do I get involved in working with athletes? So I'm happy to touch on that as well. And just to situate myself a little bit more coming into this presentation, I've had an interesting athletic journey. I started out in many team sports growing up, as a lot of athletes do, and we know that it's important for mental health as well, not to specialize too early and experience different sports. Even being the only girl in a small town on Vancouver Island playing soccer was an interesting experience. I ran track and field from the age of 12 through university. One of the only photos I could find when I was running at the University of Washington in Seattle, unfortunately, is stuck to the back of a frame that was broken. So that's why you see the broken glass. And then I also got into mountain biking after undergrad, following my brother's footsteps, who was a three-time Olympian in cross-country mountain biking. So that was fun to, switch to a variety of different sports. And then actually also competing in Xterra Triathlon, which is off-road, like a traditional triathlon, but swimming, mountain biking, and running. So I was privileged and honored to be part of a professional women's team for 8 years, doing a women's mountain bike team that had two of us doing this off-road triathlon. And it was a rare thing at the time to have a fully professional women's trade team. It was started by Gary Erickson, the owner of Luna Bar Cliff Bars, if you're familiar with the nutrition bar. And I did that through, my kids are very little in this picture, raising two children. It was a very progressive team that supported women, and even a maternity leave, which was unheard of in professional sport. So I had lots of lessons through my athletic career. In high school, I learned progressive muscle relaxation, which really helped me understand that I could control my physiology and response to anxiety and arousal around performance. So that was sort of my first foray into understanding psychological principles of performance. Through my undergrad, we had a sports psych that was working with the team and did sort of mental skills assessments on us, and I understood, there's different mental skills that could be developed. Unfortunately, I also witnessed several of my teammates struggling with eating disorders, so I became really aware of the struggles of that in a sport where body image and weight can play a factor in performance. Um, and then switching to mountain biking, where there's a bit more fear and adrenaline, and learning it was a completely different culture than running as well. And part of my master's studies was interviewing 10 of Canada's top cross-country mountain bikers at the time and learning about how they focused in what I termed a risk endurance sport. So in a sport where you can crash, where you can have a flat tire, you can have mechanicals, and you have to refocus through that 1.5 to 2 hour race. So that was a strong period of vicarious learning as I was a new mountain bike racer at the time. I went on to my doctoral studies at the University of Ottawa in the Motivation Lab, which is why I have self-determination theory pictured up here, where I really studied how coaches communicate their training plans to athlete, how important it is in any sort of hierarchical supportive mentoring relationship to support one's competence, giving really good feedback, giving choices, and holistically supporting the athletes. And that's why I have a picture of one of my favorite coaches I've worked with over the years, which is Julie Wang, was the coach of the national long track speed skating team for many years. And I really admired the way she showed care for her athletes, had an interactive dialogue and feedback for them, and supported their choices through the sport. So I worked with many winter sports in Calgary and Canmore as a young practitioner. And then out here on the West Coast where I live now, have worked with several summer sports. So these include development and national teams and also some Paralympic teams as well, such as goalball and paratriathlon and para-rowing, along with the Olympic teams. So a lot of vicarious, personal and vicarious experience that I'll touch on. Um, so just understanding a little bit more about high performance culture. I'm just sharing a few quotes from our most recent chef de mission at the 2026 Olympic Winter Games. So that was Jennifer Heil. And I really want to touch on the importance of understanding culture and context when we're looking at high performers. So often in high stakes, high performing environments. So she has a quote here talking about how the Olympics can be sort of the ultimate high pressure, high stakes scenario. So confidence, doubt, preparation, friction, joy, disappointment, it's all sort of mixed up in one through the highs and lows. She talks a little bit about in this article by Forbes magazine, her own highs and lows. So she was the first gold medalist in women's moguls at the 2006 Olympics, also in Italy, and came back as the favorite in the Vancouver 2010 games. So spoke about the immense pressure she felt coming being the favorite at the home games. She also had a teammate who had a crash and was paralyzed going into those games, so had some personal struggles. Ended up silver in the 2010 Olympics, but also talked about it as a crushing disappointment. So you might have noticed that even watching the most recent Olympics, that sometimes athletes will be in the bronze medal position, even 8th or 10th, and it's a performance of their life and they're elated. And you'll see some silver medalists absolutely in tears and crushed. So that really context of their previous performance is important to understand when you're working with athletes. And we're also going to touch on, in any high performance, this is where counselors and psychotherapists can play a really important role in supporting athletes' needs. Sometimes when we're under pressure and feeling squeezed, we're not always rational actors. So she touched on how much stress, so much pressure, and as the chef de mission leading the Canadian Olympic athletes and mission staff, she really focuses on encouraging the athletes and holding space, especially what makes sports so exciting is the unpredictable performances that can happen. So I'm also going to, moving on to that, outside of that culture is understanding when you're in a high performance environment. And again, I'll keep saying this over and over. This applies not just to athletes, but this understanding the psychology of a performance-based identity. So when a huge part of your identity is focused on your performance or your sport, even myself, who did all the right things, I had many different identities. I was a mom. I'd gone through, a terminal degree. I had a career. I had family support. Even when I retired from professional competing, I still struggled with that significantly, with that adjustment, because I didn't have that sort of grounding of my day-to-day training. So all that to say, with a performance-based identity, there are some challenges around your self-worth being contingent on your performance. And first, just to highlight that there are many positives. So as being having your performance-based identity, you defining yourself as exceptionally good at something is good for your self-esteem and confidence, and can also provide some protection against the ups and downs, and even inoculate against imposter syndrome. But some of the negatives, if your self-worth goes up and down, you feel good about yourself when you perform well or you get good results, or you have more increased feelings of inadequacy if you're not doing well. So this not only happens in competitions and games, but I've worked with athletes who have struggled with this on a day-to-day basis. Just depending on how their training day went, it can really be up and down. So also more prone to a risk, fear of failure, anxiety about meeting expectations, more of an excessive drive to avoid failure. Paradoxically, in sport, where the mind-body connection tends to be more highly tuned, if there's an intense fear of failure, that disconnection might be a little bit cut off and sort of pushing excessively. And that also relates for a vulnerability to perfectionism. So setting unrealistic high standards for your performance, being the most intense inner critic. Sometimes that culture of mental toughness says, who else can be harder on myself than me? And so that is related to sort of the negative side of perfection, which can lead to decreased satisfaction. It can lead to win at all costs mentality, or I'll be happy if, or I'll be happy when. I've also worked with athletes who end up sometimes disillusioned when they reach their most highest goal. They've made it to the Olympics, they've won the medal, expecting that to bring happiness. And we know the research on happiness shows that we tend to go back down to a relative baseline level of happiness. We'll have these peaks, but sometimes thinking it's going to bring happiness is related to that sort of perfectionist striving. And you can probably relate to things in your own lives. When I get this assignment done, when I get this degree, when I publish this book, when my social media post goes viral, there's all sorts of things that we can put contingent on our happiness. So, and also just pointing out, there can be more adaptive perfectionism where we do have high standards. We set goals that we're ambitious about, but we are able to enjoy it. We're able to be more flexible and balanced about our strengths and limitations. The fourth point here is more of a comparison relative to others. So we compare ourselves relationally. Obviously, that's a part of competitive sport, but if it becomes a hyper point of focus, it can be a bit more of a negative thing. So as President Teddy Roosevelt said over 100 years ago, comparison is a thief of joy. And we know today, even working my work with athletes, we often talk a lot about social media as well, and those comparisons that can even make it even more difficult when they're looking at highlight reels of their competitors. And as I've already alluded to, this is not just through sports. We can see this in performing arts. I've had the pleasure of working with ballroom dancers, with musicians, with actors. Some of my first big presentations and conferences were working with lawyers. And you can work in medicine, military, police. There's all sorts of arenas where these concepts apply in terms of performance-based identity. So some of the antidotes to this identity, is working on reframing pressure, seeing challenges as opportunities, working on growth mindsets, expanding identity, taming that inner critic, and focusing on the good things, expanded identity, and developing a more loving relationship with oneself. So just a little overview on some of the athlete mental health statistics. So there was an interesting study that came out of the University of Toronto leading up to what was then the 2020 Olympic and Paralympic Games. We know those got rescheduled to 2021 and they were in Tokyo. So this study surveyed 184 Olympians and Paralympians at the times that had already been selected to the Olympic Games. And they had some alarming statistics that over 40% of these athletes met the cutoff criteria for one or more mental disorders. Over 30% reported symptoms of depression. When we often think making the team can lead to more happiness. Over 18% reported symptoms of moderate to severe general anxiety, and 8.6% reported scores indicating a high risk of eating disorders. So when you compare that to an estimated 10% of Canadians in general who report a mental disorder in the same 12-month period, that was relatively high. We can also contextualize this was around the pandemic, but it's still an interesting finding. And as I already mentioned, a lot of athletes do experience post-Olympic blues or depression, which is more common. In youth sports, early specialization puts athletes more at risk with mental health burnout, even having less skills to cope at a young age with some of the pressures of sport, dealing with coaches and parents who put on pressure. And in this type of work in high performance, there's opportunities to work with coaches and parents in supporting young athletes. With a caveat, of course, we know that being involved in exercise and sport is excellent for well-being and self-esteem and confidence. We do have to be aware of excessive pressures and overscheduling. There's also, depending on identities in sports, prone to risk racism and discrimination. Statistics Canada did a study with 26 showing that 26% of individuals involved in sport who are 15 and older reported feeling that racism and discrimination were problems in community sport as well in Canada, 12% being racialized populations, 9% identifying with disabilities, and 21% from 2S LGBTQ plus communities. In terms of elite sports, approximately 35% of elite athletes suffer from disordered eating, burnout, depression, and anxiety, a statement from the American College of Sport Medicine. So that's higher, tends to be higher than the general population. There's increased stressors, I just want to point out, for student athletes, particular high school or college athletes. In 2021, there was a bit of a crisis in college sports in the NCAA. 5 athletes across the US committed suicide that spring. That led to an NCAA well-being survey and citing a need to take better care of student athletes. So they also found some gender disparities, that women in the NCAA reported more experiences of overwhelm, mental exhaustion, and anxiety, twice as much as men. There's also increased risk-taking behaviors sometimes in athletes in terms of substance abuse and alcohol use, sometimes in retirement as well with that adjustment period. Of course, being in physical activity in sports, there's higher risk of injuries and particularly concussions in some of the sports where that happens more. Short track speed skating, it happened quite a bit, one of the sports I worked with. And there's also barriers to help seeking. So some research has shown that only 10% of student athletes with known mental health conditions seek support. So another area that mental health professionals can help overcome. It has been changing traditionally from tough sport cultures, sometimes the power of the coach being perceived as weak or not getting play time if they're seeking additional mental health support, and maybe some previous negative experiences with disclosure of mental health. And it is getting better. Like, top athletes are talking more about their mental health and the importance of it on their well-being and performance. So just highlighting a few Canadians. So we have Paralympians too, who have talked openly about their mental health. We have a track cyclist here down in the lower left corner here, who had won the Tokyo Olympic gold. And sometimes the pressure comes after winning. So winning after winning has its challenges as well, and pressures and extra attention. So she talked about winning, doing well until the next fall World Championships, and coming to a point of mental exhaustion. There's lots of, taking care of yourself even after you've made hit your big goal. Just a couple other news highlights too from South of our border, you may have heard of Simone Biles, who pulled out of the 2021 Olympics due to experiencing the twisties. So when you feel like you're not safe in the air in acrobatic type sports, and sometimes that can come from a lot of pressures at once. So she's cited weekly therapy has helped her work through her traumas and healings, and she came back to the Paris Olympic winning 4 medals. Naomi Osaka has spoken, a tennis player, has spoken out about the impact on mental health from the media. 2021, she was fined $15,000 for not participating in media requirements, but she was taking care of her mental health. She's talking openly about postpartum depression after her daughter and struggling with social media negativity. I also want to highlight here Michael Phelps, who's one of the most decorated Olympians, has won 28 medals in the Olympics, has shared that therapy saved his life after struggling with anxiety and depression, and became suicidal after a second drunk driving arrest in 2014, where he started to turn his life around and talk openly about mental health. Chloe Kim won the gold medal at 2018 games, but became home so exhausted she threw her medal in the trash at her parents' house and had to rebound, but has come back after taking some time, a mental health break, and won the gold and silver at the last 2 Olympics. And we also have a sprinter here who talks, Noah Lyles, who talked about taking antidepressants and saving his life, and says, thank God for mental health. So we see a lot of high profile athletes speaking out more. And so when we're thinking of these athletes coming into counseling, I just wanted to touch on a few of the areas that might come up and that are important exploring. I do a lot of work with athletes who are struggling with confidence or around performance anxiety, and how we work with that. You know, there's approaches of the sort of the top-down approach is the reframing aspect, working on self-talk, and also the bottom-up approach of working on that mind-body connection through mindfulness, breathing techniques, relaxation, calming techniques. I've worked with a number of athletes who have dealt with high nausea and even vomiting before competitions, which is not fun at all. So really working on those grounding techniques to calm as well. There's an overlap sometimes where it's important to assess. Sometimes athletes are dealing with that burnout and mental exhaustion, or also overtraining syndrome. So they've been training to a point that they're not recovering and they're not adapting well. There's also something called relative energy deficit syndrome. So if athletes aren't getting enough calories, that can affect both males and females, insufficient to meet their training needs, and physiological functions. There's a lot of hormonal changes. So there's a lot of overlap. You might see, oh, this is depression, but being able to differentiate between these three things. And sometimes that means working in more of a collaborative team around an athlete. Disordered eating. So that's another role that counselors and mental health practitioners can assess and work with athletes on. Sometimes their nutritional knowledge is not that high, especially as they're younger. Psychological safety has also been more front and center around sport. Are athletes in an environment where they're safe to express themselves, make mistakes, provide feedback without fear of negative consequences? For example, a survey in 2021 of 4,000 athletes across 50 sports by the US Center for Safe Sport, the nonprofit organization, investigated sexual, physical, and emotional abuse at all levels, from Olympic to youth sport. And they found indicators of psychological harm, such as body shaming, bullying, neglect, scapegoating, or belittlement. So it's really important. I've been in environments where this is happening with coaches, and often coaches aren't vetted in the same way as teachers or other professionals. So there's a lot more support for coaches in training, but it's another area that counselors can be aware of. Working with identity loss through injury. So whether injuries or you're temporary out of your sport, dealing with the grief and staying connected, identity loss through deselection, retirement, and transitioning out of sport is a big area of concern, and helping athletes through that. There's also the working with their strength from a strength-based solution-focused perspective can work well with performers and athletes. So many of the qualities that make them high performers and athletes can be applied to other areas of their life. So that discipline, that commitment, that problem solving, that self-reliance, all those sorts of things and skills they've built up. culture, just like with regular clients, is an important area. There's a diversity of client athletes, and I've already touched on different races, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, age, ableness, sexual orientation can come into a safe space in therapy to be able to talk about that more. And also be aware there's many difference in, having studied motivation. I always like to ask, why did you choose your sport? What keeps you committed to it? How does it fit into your life? So recognizing there's many different motivations and reasons that athletes will choose their athletic role. Another area that comes up a lot is if you're working with teams, so team dynamics and coach communication. So this is where, systems theory from counseling or couples and marriage therapy can even apply. Family therapy, working with rowers, two rowers who have to be in the boat for hours at a time. I remember joking with, rowing with two, it's like a marriage. You have to figure out how to talk and communicate. So I think you'll find there's lots of applications from counseling to these high performance environment. Trying to go ahead now, but something's happening. And I just want to touch on quickly a few sport specific terms that you may have heard or not. So there's yips, twisties, frozen skill syndrome. So this is when you hear athletes talk about, I just had a block, things that I was automatically doing so well, I just lost the skill. And this can happen from a sudden intense pressure, coming back as the favorite, or actually choking, where you had a really high level performance, you were the favorite, but you were unable to execute your skills effectively or as anticipated. So our most recent example at the Winter Olympics was, I just want to pronounce his name correctly, the quad god, he was called, Ilya Malinin, who had won 14 straight events coming in. He was a two-time world champion, but he had some devastating falls. And he shared he felt all the traumatic moments of his life just flooded in his head. The nerves were overwhelming. So on the biggest stage, those who appear the strongest may be still, he stated, those who appear the strongest may still be fighting battles on the inside. So sometimes that's a bit of a misconception. If athletes are doing well, performers look like they're functioning well, but sometimes on the inside, they're still struggling. So this is another, I could talk a lot more about how we deal with these kind of things, but these are just some terms to be aware of when you're working with athletes specifically. And a lot of this comes down to helping athletes find that ideal balance between pressure and performance. And I'm also comparing it to the window of tolerance introduced by Dr. Dan Siegel, which describes the range of emotional and physiological arousal in which we perform most effectively and function well. And just like when we're working with sports, we tend to perform well when we're stretched just beyond our present zone of comfort. And so that might be different depending on the athlete. And a lot of our work can be working with athletes is helping them improve their ability to be more flexible in that window of tolerance and be able to self-regulate and adapt to different levels of pressure. And that's what a lot of mental performance consultants do, is work on the routines, the preparation, simulating these high performance environments, even going, like, for example, with long track speed skating the year before Sochi Olympics, we go over to Sochi, we get to do the world championships on that ice, simulate the environment, know what to expect. So there's lots of ways to simulate the best you can so it feels familiar when you get there. As we're winding down the presentation here today, just a few points around the scope of practice. So the field of sports psychology started out more in kinesiology and physical education, and now it's moved more into mental health focus, which is why there's a lot more duly trained practitioners that work with athletes and performers, because we know it's really hard to make a clean line between performance enhancement and optimization and working on mental health factors. They often overlap. But it's not unlike physical training, where a mental performance consultant will work often like a coach. When you're doing well, you're physically able to train and push limits. But if you're injured or ill, you'll go to see the more medical professionals. So it's kind of a similar distinction. Are you providing therapy or performance enhancement, or a bit of both, depending on who, if you're in a private practice hired by a team, a coach. Sometimes there's multiple relationships if you're in a performance environment where you might be supporting a coach, a team, individuals and being clear about those confidentiality in those visible systems where often you're in the field at training, talking with athletes, sometimes in open spaces. So that's a consideration. Sometimes there's the over-identification that can happen with the athlete or team. We're winning, we're losing, that confidentiality as well. Also, the cultural competence, again, is really important. So having worked with so many sports, I've learned how important it is to learn the culture, to learn the language, the lingo of the sports, to really, for that buy-in and rapport as well as an important factor. In terms of an additional certification outside of being registered or being a mental health clinician, there's something that's called the Certified Mental Performance Consultant. It's a North America-wide designation. It's a partnership between the Association for the Applied Sports Psychology in the US and the Canadian Sport Psychology Association. So unlike, similar to a counseling degree, you may even be able to have some masters of counseling students I've known have done practicums during their masters of counseling degree in sport environments. If you're interested in getting that experience at the same time, or post-masters, you can be mentored in a sport environment. So here's just a few of the, a master's degree. If you're coming from a primary psychology or counseling background, you may need to pick up a few extra courses in sports psychology or sports science. And not unlike your practicum in counseling, there'll be some mentorship and direct client contact in different sport contexts. And so there's different pathways you can take if you're interested in working with performers and athletes. There's clinical roles within performance systems. Some counselors work with athletes through psychotherapy clinics, clubs, provincial and national sport organizations often like to have mental health, mental performance consultants working with their teams and organizations, developing a private practice niche. We also have the Canadian Sport Institutes, which I've touched on, that I've worked with across the country. And those are great. They also often have mental health referral networks. And in those sport environments, you're often working with coaches, physiotherapists, dietitian, strength trainers, a team physiologist, physician, sometimes a technician, and being the mental performance consultant in those team environments is a really exciting career, although there's not a lot of work depending on the funding of the sport. So that's one barrier in Canada right now, that our funding for team sports has not gone up substantially since 2010. So that is a bit of a struggle for our national and development teams when they're competing against other countries that have a lot more funding. Almost last slide here. I just wanted to highlight some of the things I've touched on in terms of the systems and high performers. There's a personal dimensions when you're working one-on-one, assessing and supporting mental health and well-being, along with physical health and well-being. We know those aren't separate. The psychological safety, physical safety, that motivation, self-determination. And this is an article by Kyle Packett in Canada's Sport Information Resource Center, who has a nice little graph here on the side, just saying that a culture of excellence sustains performance and personal thriving. So that's where the importance of our role as counselors and therapists can support that side as well. I've just got a quick few resources here, which can be shared obviously after this presentation if you're interested in terms of those different associations. Game Plan was started after Vancouver 2010, so that's Canada's total athlete wellness program. So seeing the need to help athletes build their career skills before they retire is really helpful. And they also do referrals for mental health. There's lots of support for coaches. We have a safe sport. If you're working with athletes, knowing there's hotlines, even with sport, abuse-free sport. There's a Canadian Centre for Mental Health and Sport, and the sport institutes I talked about. And other than lots of resources at NCAA mental health resource page, as well as a resource document for our Canadian varsity sports is U Sports. So I'll wrap it up there, and I just have a video I think Anna's going to be able to share next that I think sort of brings it all together, and it's a clip from the documentary The Weight of Gold. If you haven't heard of it or seen it, I'd encourage you to watch it, but it just has a few athletes, some of them that I've already mentioned, a 2-minute clip talking about the importance of mental health.
dealing with the incredible highs and lows of being an Olympian, the sacrifices and the challenges, and figuring out a transition from such a hyper-focused life. All of it can be extremely hard, but there is a way forward. There are people and places that can help, and there are outcomes that can be really successful. We just have to change the perception that problems with mental health are something to hide. And in a world where Olympians are leading the way forward to break down that stigma, the impact could be massive.
Where a better place to make change than on the Olympic stage? Youth around the world watch and look up to these people. And if we can take a stand and make change, it could affect the world in recognizing what truly matters.
It doesn't matter if you're an Olympic gold medalist and you are the most decorated athlete of human history, or you're someone driving a bus, you're prone to depression. My faith was how I was able to handle it and still handle it, but that's okay to handle it differently.
When stuff started getting bad, if I had just even seen someone like once or twice a week, we probably wouldn't have ended up where I did.
We're human. I don't think I have to say anything else. We're human beings just like everybody else. Yeah, I had won a shit ton of medals. I had a great career. Doesn't matter. I wasn't happy with who I was. I thought of myself of just a swimmer and not a human being, not a person. No self-love, no self-confidence.
Okay, thanks for that, Anna.
Thank you very much, Dr. Danelle Kabush. That was such a great presentation, and I'm sure there's so much questions that came up as a result. As a quick reminder, our chat is disabled, but the Q&A is where you're going to post your questions. For the mentee engagement, how confident do you feel supporting clients who are athletes or high performance driven? Our answer is, please don't ask me. Unsure. I can see myself in this role, but I want to learn more. And put me in, coach. Some of our answers. Great. So, a lot of you are recognizing that, hey, you're interested in this role, but you want to learn more, which is a great segue to the next part of today. So we are going to have a fireside chat with the amazing Dr. Danelle Kabush and the phenomenal Janelle Peters. And Janelle Peters is such a great guest to have, especially if you are here wanting to learn more about what it's like working in this field. She's a registered psychotherapist and a clinical director. She's an alumni of the MACP program at Yorkville, and she is currently a practicum supervisor for supervising students of Yorkville in Toronto. So I saw in the Q&A, there's a couple people from Toronto. I'm very excited to introduce you to Janelle Peters. And Janelle Peters, tell us your connection to the Toronto Raptors.
I think I had a little bit of fun for a bit, a couple of years, 4 years, working as their first ever mental health clinician. So that was a great time. And it definitely solidified my love and connection in fusing these two intersections. So wonderful time indeed, for sure.
And I'm going to pass you off to Dr. Danelle Kabush, but first I was told to ask you about a ring. Is there some type of ring that you're going
I
to
completely forgot to bring it, so that means I just have to come back and show the championship ring, because I do have one in my house. I just am not home.
Wonderful. Thank you. I look forward to this chat.
All right. Thanks, Cindy. And welcome to the Danelle and Janelle chat.
I know. Isn't that so cool?
So we have about 15 minutes. And before we go to some audience Q&A, so I'm going to start my timer, of course. Janelle, so why don't you we've had a great, fabulous introduction from Cindy. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about your journey in that intersection of mental health and high performance, and anything that sticks out?
So I've always loved sports, played sports, still play sports, and been so connected to it because everybody in my family has played something, to very competitive levels, to the people around me being in professional and high performing spaces. And so I think for me, there's just always been this eye of merging these two spaces, but I was always very curious. I was kind of reading some of your bio stuff in other spaces now, and I saw that you loved psych books from a very young age. And I was like, kind of the same. And I was just like, what does it look like to like merge these two spaces together? But I knew I never wanted to get to the competitive level, like to that point in the elite space, because I've seen what happens to those around me. And this is kind of what stopped me from wanting to go that route, but wanting to explore it a little bit more. And so it was kind of one of the things I kind of just put on the back burner, and it wasn't always the main focus, but it came back around. And I think sometimes one of the things I recognize is that you can be good at more than one thing. And I said, all right, we're going to come circle the block a little bit and kind of learn what it's like to put these two spaces together. And I did a lot of community work to hit some of those things that you were talking about before, to like reducing the stigma at an earlier age and trying to make it more dynamic in those spaces. And that's kind of what led me to taking on so many other routes in collegiate and professional sports.
Okay, great. And I know I love hearing that story and how you've connected the two. And I know, having been an athlete and sometimes transitioning out of sport, that transition can be hard, and trying to find the balance again and recognizing what are some of the skills and challenges from the high performance context that can apply to life outside of sport. And I'm wondering, in your work with as a clinician now, some with athletes, some with executives, what are some of the similarities, I guess, in high performance contexts in sport, but unique differences when we're working with high performers that aren't in sport?
Oh, I think the similarities is like the first thing that you were mentioning a while back in your presentation, like that assumption I think that a lot of us make, I would say, that like high performing means like high processing and they can process things really well. And that's not the case all the time. They move in some of these spaces we talked about, like executives and those in entertainment industry, and those environments are so fast. It doesn't necessarily mean that they understand how to slowly process things, because they always have to pack it down and put it away. And so when it comes time to sitting in a space and talking to somebody like us, they're like, okay, so tell me what I have to do. How do I fix this? What do I get to? And then you're like, wait, take a minute, like breathe, right? So I feel like that's one of the things that you kind of notice that goes across almost all of the spaces for anybody that's in the high performing realm. And then I would say the other thing that I notice is like transferable between the two is that they have the ability to do things really well if you give them a chance to see what it actually looks like and what it means on a whole. And so I think by doing that slowing down piece, like athletes, again, anybody that's like a lawyer, and like you said, the air traffic control space, like I think when you give them a second to like be like, okay, but you know how to do all of these things well, what makes you think you can't do this processing part? What makes you think you can't do this once you learn it? So like, let's teach you how to do that. Let's teach you how to interpret something differently instead of from a place of like fear and failure and worry. And then we can see what happens. So there's so many things that are transferable between all of those spaces.
I like how you're saying that, just having time, whether it's in a therapeutic relationship, to take time to reflect. Often high performers are very driven, especially athletes who have worked with coaches. Some of the struggles I've seen in transitioning to a career is that they've been given training on a day-to-day basis, and they just show up and they work hard and they know what to do. And they do have a lot of self-regulation skills, but sometimes when it's transferring to a career, they forget that those skills don't transfer over. And they're used to being almost, not, I don't want to say told what to do, but have a plan in front of them. So it's
the routine is always there for them.
Yeah, the routine's there. So it's finding that new routine. And I know when I retired from sport, it was kind of this transition of, oh, I can do whatever I want. I can eat whatever I want, or I don't have to be as disciplined. And then it was a struggle to kind of reset and find, well, what is exercise? And I say being an athlete doesn't mean you have to compete. Being an athlete means you are working towards a goal and you like to take care of your physical health, and sort of having to reset and use some of the skills and, come back to what is the why of being physically active and what does it mean to me now? And then how that
that's
applies
so true.
to your
So true.
career as well. So
You reminded me of something else too. I just
ahead.
want to like add something, but you reminded me of the fact that like they don't always get afforded the opportunity to be messy, like that whole perfectionist thing that you were saying before. So like coming into that space, I feel like I have athletes walk into the space or come see me, and it's like you can see that they're still performing in a sense, it's still there. And it's like, well, I'm not allowed to be messy. I'm not allowed to unravel. I'm not allowed to do all the things. So creating that environment too, that when you're just saying like when somebody ends and you're like, they're done, they're like, can I be messy? Can I do this? So that's what it reminded me of. Sorry when you said
Yeah,
that.
can I be messy, or who am I now that
Yeah.
being the athlete isn't the center of my identity, and having space to reflect on that and explore. And so when you think of that, what do you think are some of the strengths that high performance clients, athletes or otherwise, tend to bring? You've touched on how you can come into therapy and more like, tell me, as working with a coach, you can just be like, give me the plan. What do I need to do? I'm determined I can fix it. But sometimes therapy looks a little bit different. There's more time for reflection and exploration. So back to the question is, what do you think some of the strengths are that clients bring into therapy, and how can they be used to sort of overcome some of those barriers to change as well?
I would say one of the strengths is they're the type of individuals when something works, they stick to it and they will
Mhm.
do it over and over again. So you know that repetition, they are able to do that physically with their body. And then once they get it in their mind as well, they're like, oh, I never forgot that thing that you said, or I always remember this when we worked on it. And they keep to it and they love to share with other people too. And I think that's some of the trends that we're seeing now where athletes are talking more about like what has worked for them. And this is why the conversations about that mental health support and performance and having an expert in your space as part of there's no different than having a dietitian and AT and all of those people around you. I think they love to share with people what works. And so I think that's such a big strength, not only for the athlete, but for like teams and the space altogether in the field as a whole. So I'd say that's like their biggest strength for me that I've
Yeah,
seen.
yeah. Yeah, and sort of almost when the pendulum switches, whether you're a high performer as an executive or another, like I mentioned, the air traffic controllers or medicine or law, some of the principles from athletes, and I've found this myself being post-competitive athlete too, really apply to those arenas in terms of taking care of yourself physically, taking intentional breaks. So a lot of these principles that help athletes perform, whether it's athletes transitioning or helping other high performers, sometimes we don't realize how important these routines are, or preparation, getting good sleep, getting small
Mm-hmm.
breaks. And usually top performers perform well when they intentionally take breaks, or even right before they perform, they take a breath. They regulate themselves, right? So sometimes when we get
Yeah.
into career-based performance, we can just go, 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 and
Yeah.
recognize that, recovery, I guess, recovery is obvious in sport. If you don't recover, you break down and you get injured. But sometimes it's not so obvious in other high-performing environments till you hit a wall with burnout or
Yeah,
mental exhaustion. So it can go both ways. So
for
yeah.
sure.
Can we've highlighted that you worked with the Raptors a bit. Can you talk a little bit about what might be unique working in team environments in sport, and how that also might apply to leadership teams or executive teams in other
I
careers?
think it's that reminder of like remembering your role and
Mhm.
what your position is and how it benefits like the greater team. And like I think there's sometimes this thing like I have to make sure that we win and it's on me. And you've heard it before at like certain levels, and they're
Yeah.
like, well, I got to make sure that I bring it home for us. And it's like, but you're not the only person that's in control of bringing it home. Like we all have a role to play. And when you're sitting with those team dynamics, it's reminding everybody that you don't have to take all of it on. You got to take on your piece, and you're a key piece in that puzzle to like making sure that we see the bigger picture and making sure we get to those championships. So I think helping people kind of zoom back in to be like, here's your role as a person, and when you look out of it, this is what you're contributing to the greater team. And then I think as a clinician in that space, it's reminding yourself that you can also get too swept up in the whole team part of it too, because you are there to make sure that these individual players are supported and they're cared for. And we all want the best outcome, but it can never be at the detriment of the person that you're caring for and that you're supporting. And so trying to find that balance at times, but then depending on the role that you had in my space, I'm helping individual athletes, but I'm also working with coaches. I'm also kind of navigating conversations in between two spaces. And so it does become a little bit of a balancing act. But it's always remember like what is my job here? What is my role? And my role, I always have to remind myself it's to care for the person that is the athlete, right? And so never like make sure that always make sure that the person sits at the forefront for me,
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
matter if it's a team dynamic.
Right, right. I'd agree in my work with teams, even if it's a group of individual sports or a team sport, that keeping the athlete client first and foremost as the client. And sometimes it's interesting how different team environments. I've been in environments where athletes have very open, warm relationships with their coaches
Yeah.
and will say openly, you can tell the coach anything we talk about. I'm an open book. I've had some experiences where athletes are like, this half hour, I'm going to talk about confidential things. The next half hour, I'm going to talk about things that we will openly talk with the coach about. And other environments where they would say, I want to meet with you, but I don't want the coach to know because it was so
Yeah.
toxic and the coach saw it as a weakness or they'd be punished. And that's a really unfortunate environment. But there's also a lot of work to do, even though it's one part of many in a team on the culture
Hmm.
and supporting athletes. One of my favorite exercises actually in doing with teams is, what do you bring to the team and what do you need from the team? And it's like just time to reflect with the group and build that team culture is a really rewarding role. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so I guess we don't have a lot of time left. So I think
Okay.
I'm going to anticipate a question from everyone here today is if you were perhaps a Master's of Counseling student and interested in working with high performers, anything that you would add in terms of advice? Um, uh,
I would
yeah.
say the biggest advice is try and get into knowing what the space looks like that you want to support because it is different. I think it's very different from just looking at a textbook and a modality and approach and being like, I'm going to utilize this. And you touched on all the different components that you have to pay attention to. I think another added layer to that is the creativity that has to come into those spaces. When you're working with athletes and anybody at that level, you have to figure out like, well, how am I going to make what I'm reading actually apply to this space? And
Mm,
it might not look very copy and paste. I was rebounding, right, as my way of being at practices and catching the ball and like having conversations through there. I would be doing very activity based things and having elements of surprise when they walk into the room and they're like, what is going on, right? Because it's not sit down sometimes and have a 50-minute session with someone. It
mhm.
doesn't always look like this. It's how are you building that? But you don't know what that looks like if you're very isolated from the space or have no idea what these individuals are going through on a daily basis. And so, kind of doing the work in reverse at times can help to go into those spaces. If it's wanting to work in entertainment, to help people that are in entertainment or lawyers or police officers, do you know what their anxiety provoking situations look like in their space and what they have to go through? Can you see what it looks like on their face? To me, getting into those spaces as best as you can, just even if it's a volunteer and just being around them and learning from them can definitely
Mhm.
help apply what you learn.
Yeah. I think you've highlighted on a conversation we sometimes have as counselors, do you have to have experienced every issue or mental health concern to be able to help others? And obviously we can't have experienced everything, but we can learn about them. Some things we can relate in an athlete in high performing environments. It helps to have some rapport or relatability.
Yeah.
But also, even more important, I've had that experience too, is to gain rapport with coaches or athletes to spend time, learn about their training environment. In rowing, it was going out on the coach boat. In speed skating, it was showing up rinkside or even getting on my Canadian Tire hockey skates to skate around the middle of the short track rink and have these sort of side conversations with athletes, trying not to get run over between their intervals flying around the rink. So
Man,
there's
I
many
completely agree with that part.
yeah, to learn the culture and their way of being and some of the demands they face. And that happens with any career if you're not familiar with it, familiarizing yourself with not only the general demands, but then the unique individual in front of you and how they're navigating those demands.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's so true. I worked at Pepperdine and part of their sports psychology department having to support 13 different teams. I had no idea what water polo was about. But there I was in the water trying to figure out how are you moving your legs and your arms at the exact same time? Like it was like one of those things. So I completely agree with you that sometimes it's getting into as much of their element and environment and space as you can to make it make sense.
Right. And I bet, like me and being in many different sports, you start to recognize while you're learning the unique culture, there's many common threads that run
Yes.
through them all in terms of mental health and well-being and mental sports skills. So that's why it really builds on each other. Well, I know I'm the timekeeper here. So thanks for the conversation, Danelle. I feel like we could keep going for a long time,
I
but I'm going to
know.
stop here and see if we have any Q&A from the audience, if they have any specific or general questions for either or both of us.
Yes, so this is such a fascinating conversation, and there definitely is some questions that are popping up in the Q&As. So maybe I'll address maybe who I think might answer it best. And so Danelle, the first question was around the CMCP certification,
Mhm.
and they were just wondering if this is applicable to other high-performing domains, such as high-profile music artists, etc.
Yeah, I would certainly say it is. I mean, it's mainly based in supporting athletes, but there's often different jobs that go out to working with the military, working with musicians, entertainers. It's all the same skill sets. And really sometimes you might say, well, why would I need that accreditation? Some of the benefits are networking. There's an annual conference. There's peer consultation groups in each province. So just like counseling, you can, if you're a member, you can show up and say, I've got this athlete and get peer consultation. But yeah, it can be applied to many different domains, is the short answer.
Thank you. And the next question is for Janelle. So, Janelle, you did mention a little bit of this approach, but what would you do if you had a client who was only interested in getting help to win? Maybe at the sacrificing their own mental health for the team, or just that was their goal for counseling is to find ways to win. And it conflicts with their good mental health. How would you proceed with that?
That's a good question. I would kind of see what what it would really mean for them to win, like what is rooted in it, and what is what does it look like after for them to win? Like, what does this change for you? How is this going to lead you to? What is it that your brain is going to that it's going to lead you to? Really sit with like where this win is weighted in for me. And I would maybe even go back to like winning in the past. Maybe it could be something very different where they haven't won anything, right? And so they feel like exactly what Danelle was saying before, this win means everything for them. They think this is going to change everything at the end. So really taking time to look at like what this win is weighted in for them to see, for you to actually have a better understanding of what that means for that client. And then from there, I think showing the realistic part of like what happens after the win. Like, what do you think is going to happen after this win? Right. And maybe show some of the reality of what happens after wins, because I think there's an assumption that it's all only one bucket of what goes on, but like, where's the neutral part of it? Where's the maybe the negative part of it? And have they considered those avenues as well? But definitely look at what it's weighted in and then what they're expecting to come from this win, that outcome. So I would kind of pay attention to that until I learn more about it.
Excellent. And I think a lot of students will recognize from, the skills classes, like going deeper, like figuring out what that actually means, like what that win means, as you're kind of saying. So well job. Thanks for that
I think
answer.
Danelle had another part to share as well.
Oh, yeah,
Excellent.
if I may add to the irony or the paradox in winning is that often athletes are most successful when they focus on the process or the journey of how they're going to get there. So that can often address that win at all costs mentality. And one of my most memorable moments with the long track speed skating team in Calgary prior to the Olympics was a group that had already been to the Olympics and a group that was going for the first time. And the best advice from the group that had already been there was have a through plan, have a plan beyond the Olympics. And that can help sort of, you know, balance out that identity of being so focused on the win or the result, because you're gonna struggle regardless of whether you get the win or not with that post-Olympic blues or post-win.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So the next question does relate a little bit to the topic of distress tolerance and that window of tolerance. Jordan had a question around if you're working with someone who is working to kind of sit with that distress tolerance, and it's around like the thought around, hey, if I stop running, you're tired, don't give up, pushing past that thought in a physical activity. Do you find that that also improves the ability to do so in a mental capacity around like self-discipline or, improving tolerance for general resistance and resilience?
Did I let
That's
you
a good
start and then I'll
question.
add something in after?
Yeah, I can start. If I'm understanding the question, yeah. Like I mentioned, we do our best when we're just, pushing beyond our current comfort zone. So it's like a muscle that we're stretching. I've done a lot of interest in an attentional focus, right? In terms of your focus in sport, but your physical persistence. So if you start out running and you're going 20 minutes, maybe the next time is 25, maybe it's 30, and you're sort of building that ability to focus through that time. So that does build that focus muscle. And the second part was I'm already losing the question. Sorry.
Yeah,
Outside.
Just around this idea of, if you're working with a client to
Yeah.
develop that distress tolerance around being uncomfortable physically, does that also translate then to the emotional capacity to kind of push through resilience?
Right, right. I would say so in many ways. Ironically, sometimes performing well in sports is dissociating away from sometimes from that discomfort and being able to compartmentalize. But at the same time, we can also perform well when we embrace it and really lean into that discomfort, which is probably a more healthy way. I know the athlete I had pictured there, Clara Hughes, often talked about, who is a two-time, many-time Olympian in cycling and speed skating, often talked about the pain of being bent over in speed skating and that in their legs being one of the most painful things, but really leaning into that discomfort, being comfortably uh, uncomfortable is what athletes work with. And I think that can apply to emotions as well, even though sometimes athletes do struggle with expressing emotions, different sport cultures as well. So there is some, transferability there, perhaps. Janelle, I'll let you add
Yeah,
anything.
I agree with you. And the part where you're mentioning like having an athlete kind of understand that this is part of what this process looks like. I think we assume that like it's the better I am at something, it's not going to hurt, and you realize that like this pain does come unfortunately with this, and it's something that I'm going to learn to embrace and compete with and understand what it means for me, but also know that it doesn't mean just packing away and never dealing with it. I can talk about how much that hurts. I can talk about how this is painful. I can talk about what I have to tell myself in order to continue to execute the skill that I've practiced and the precision that I want to, despite what I'm feeling. So I definitely think there's always a connection between the two.
Excellent. So we're getting a lot of questions, and I'm going to pause for a moment and bring it back to Janelle. You did offer to come back. And with keeping in mind how many questions we have, we're not going to get through these all in the next 4 minutes. So if you're okay with it, Janelle, would you be willing to come back and hopefully Danelle as well, and have a bit of a fireside, forum chat that would be written or maybe engaging with students that we could answer the rest of these questions?
If Danelle comes back, I'll be here.
Definitely would love to.
Wonderful. Yeah, so we're going to keep note of all the questions that were asked, and we're going to kind of move them over to having those answered for you in a different context because we do want to keep in mind our time and that we do have a couple more other experts in this field to talk to. So we're going to move along. Thank you very much, Janelle and Danelle, for that amazing engagement and for everyone's questions. Like I said, we will answer them in time, so thank you for posing them. Some of these questions might also translate really well to the next discussion, which we're going to have with our amazing panelists. So we do have Dr. Avi and Dr. Stacy. They are faculty at Yorkville University. So we're going to kind of open up the discussion as well with this topic for people who may not necessarily be in the sports field. So the question is how do you define high performance in your area of practice? And how does that definition shape the way you work with your clients? And maybe I'll start with Dr. Stacy and then we could jump to Dr. Avi.
Okay, thank you very much. Just to introduce myself, I am a course lead in the Doctor of Counseling and Psychotherapy program at Yorkville, and it's really exciting to see so many people in the master's program. And I think that there are so many parallels to be drawn from everything that you've heard today, particularly because I think that completing a master's program, especially when you are working full-time, balancing possibly families, that is somebody who would meet the criteria of a high-functioning individual. And then I love the advice about thinking beyond the end. So thinking beyond, as Dr. Kabush said, thinking beyond the Olympics. So keeping in mind, what comes next. I just wanted to comment a little bit about how working with high-functioning executives, in my case, working with a private clinic in Canada, the Cleveland Clinic Canada, they have an executive health program that I was a part of for quite a while. And they actually hired me not long after I had graduated from Athabasca is where my master's in counseling psychology is from. So just a heads up on that one. It was an incredible education in seeing high functioning executives. And this is definitely the kind of environment where you cannot put yourself into it. There wasn't a possibility to be at a mining site in another part of the world, in the same way that Danelle talked about jumping into the pool and learning how to do polo. But definitely, like, there was the same kind of sense of, well, how do you do this thing with your hands and your legs at the same time? And I think that some of the things that we've talked about today, there are themes that carry over. But in particular, I wanted to comment on the difference between early and mid-career challenges and late stage careers. So I saw people across their career span. And something that I did notice that, and this aligns with what Dr. Kabush had mentioned earlier about early and mid-career athletes, is this fear of failure as a driving motivator and perfectionism. To the point where a lot of these people would have difficulty ending their workday. So they'd be answering emails and texts and messages and putting their phone down, expecting to get to sleep right away. So that's often a habit of not being able to kind of turn the brain off, being able to balance all those things that we tell our clients to do, to have like a nice balanced amount of working and relaxation. And we know that as therapists, when we're not able to attend to that balance, we see the same things happening with high functioning executives, which is burnout. And then the things that we do to cope with burnout, which is to often work more, thinking that that will help, or turning to substance or alcohol use, thinking that will give us more energy as well. And I don't know if that is anything that occurs with elite athletes. A question. I don't know if we'll get to answering it today, but I think the biggest takeaway in all of this is that the late career executives across the board express gratitude. And they express gratitude for their family members that had supported them. They express gratitude for their colleagues. And in particular, the colleagues that they expressed gratitude for were the supporting ones. And so it was, for me, very moving to see the insight that these people carried through across their personal and professional lives about how they didn't do it alone. And so I think when we talk about athletes as well, high functioning athletes, and these great descriptions of the teams that surround them, I think that there's so much to be learned and a carryover to high functioning executives as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So Dr. Abby, the same question, I'm going to do a bit of a different spin. So how do you define high performance in your area of practice? And what clinical competencies do you think are most important for working with that population?
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Danelle and Janelle and everybody, and Stacy and Cindy yourself. Well, I want to take a broader perspective to your question in terms of my practice and the way that I see high performance in terms of like expanding people's abilities or skills or performance enhancement. Well, I look at it from a broad perspective. For example, somebody who wants to be more assertive, somebody who tells me that they have been thinking about applying for a promotion or for a different position at their work. But they have been thinking about it for a while and something has been blocking them. Somebody who tells me that they are so interested in learning something new, but they have been sitting with that thought for a while. So it's not only related to like athletes or artists or high functioning people, like high performers who wants to expand their performance. So it can be anybody who has a purpose, who has a goal at least, and they want to get there. So I would like to sit with them and look at this from more humanistic perspective, but at the same time, client as experts, So I do really believe that they already have everything that they need to have in order to start working and showing them forward whatever they're hoping to perform better or to achieve or to progress. Um, Even though they do not see that way, I still believe that they need everything. So I would like to engage that the people and individuals collaboratively to um, look into the motivation um, and what is the motivation coming from? What are the sources, like Janelle said? What are the meanings behind? What are the values involved? But at the same time, engage imagination. Can you imagine? How can you imagine what you want to work toward? And I want to make kind of like do our best to focus on the efforts, on the attempt, on that desire that they want, on the motivation, on the efforts of the time that they're like putting into this, or they will be putting into this, or the thoughts that they're putting, and the efforts, and the kind of like process rather than only the outcome. But at the same time, another area that I think it would be important for us to collaboratively assess and work on with individuals who want to kind of like enhance their performance or get to their goals would be like what is actually what are the barriers, or what are the things that are blocking them or taking them behind from working on there. And then maybe it could be sometimes go back to traumas, and sometimes can go back to the perception, or their thoughts or perspective, or like environmental factors. And then based on those barriers, we can also address those and work on those so that they can start putting the efforts and move forward. So yeah, I guess that's how I look at it.
Excellent. Well, thank you, everyone. There is such an amazing amount of knowledge and just wisdom and experience in this room that I don't want it to end. However, we're down to our last 4 minutes. So, with that being said, this is not goodbye. I feel like we will be having more engagement with our keynote speaker as well as Janelle, and then also if Dr. Avi and Stacey are willing, maybe we can kind of follow up with some of the questions that were asked by our audience to kind of have more of an engagement. So thank you very much for taking the time today. We do have some mentee questions as we close off today. So as a wrap up, what issues feel most urgent for counselors working in high performance environment? So the options are understanding high performance culture in client context, navigating ethics and scope of practice, supporting identity transitions and career endings, preventing burnout and over-identification with performance, training and preparation gaps in counseling education, and then clarifying role boundaries with performance consultants. So feel free to cast your vote on the mentee. This will be up for even after today, so feel free to cast your vote. We're seeing a lot of people identifying certain areas of wanting to learn a bit more, and preventing burnout seems to be leading by far. So that's maybe a topic that we'll have to follow up with. The next question is, how prepared do you feel to work with clients in high performance or high pressure context in your current or future practice? So some of the options around that are not at all, somewhat, neutral, prepared, very prepared. So we're seeing a lot of prepared. So that's a great ode to those presenters today. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. And like I said, we will have some more information for you after today. In one word, what should guide ethical counseling in high performance contexts? What are your thoughts on using, oh, there we go, integrity. That's a very large word. I agree. Boundaries, excellent. Cultural sensitivity, yeah, definitely. Compassion, confidentiality. These are amazing words. Yes, thank you for sharing. Research, yeah, that evidence-based research, consultation, we're seeing supervision, flexibility. Yeah, yeah, you guys are definitely presenting very knowledgeable. A great question that we close off with today, because this is going to guide our practice forum number 3, is what topics would you be interested in for the next section? We had a little bit of votes around burnout earlier, but what are you looking at to learn? This is for you. So I see mindset in there, autism, yeah, definitely something. Comorbidity, yeah. Child psychotherapy, yeah, that's a great one, because we're aware that Yorkville doesn't cover a lot in the classes, so maybe this idea of child psychotherapy would be a good topic to have for a forum. Supervision, ADHD. Oh, we're seeing a lot of great things here. Okay, well, with that being said, we are going to take this list and do our research to find the next topic that's best for you. Thank you very much for sharing your time. Thank you very much to our amazing keynote speakers and guests and panelists today, Danelle, Janelle, Abby, Stacy, and Anna. Thank you for, helping us through with this venti. Everyone have a great rest of your week. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being amazing. And yes, good luck in your field in this practice. Thank you all.